Welcome to the second lecture of the course on sociological perspectives on modernity. In the first lecture, we provided a broader outline of the course, namely thematic preliminaries, sociological modernism, ultra-modernism, the structuralist interpretation, society as human creation, Western Marxist perspectives on modernity, and how to synthesize modernity with social theory, and then how to aim at destruction of, deconstruction of modernity. Okay. Thereby we arrive at a new totality. Okay. Okay. And we are still staying on with thematic preliminaries. Okay. We have discussed how when we start with the thought currents of modernity, we do not believe in a linear model of modernity or linear view of modernity. We do believe in multiple modernities or the way alternative modernities may be construed against one way of looking at European modernity. Okay. Modernity cannot may be European, may be American, may be African, may be Asian, may be Indian. Okay. Modernity even within India you can look at multiple modernities. Okay. Okay. That is why we want to, in this course we want to question one way of looking at modernity. That is why we must interrogate the hitherto existing views about one way of looking at modernity, only one way, only singular view of modernity. Okay? Modernity must be pluralistic in nature. Okay? That is why when I say we must interrogate, okay, the term interrogation or interrogating modernity does not mean merely destruction of hitherto existing ideas. Okay? We have already discussed how interrogating modernity or interrogation also refers to the dialectic of engaging with and interrogating hitherto existing ideas. And the ethos of interrogating modernity or interrogation loses its significance in the absence of a critical engagement with hitherto existing ideas. We have discussed this. Engagement assumes greater significance in the context of not just interrogation, but also interrogating the interrogator. Both engaging with and interrogating are historically conditioned, are historically integrated, and therefore context specific. This course, for the sake of simplicity, is about the critical modernist paradigm in sociology. Okay? When I say critical paradigm in sociology, I mean sociological thinking about modernity and sociology as a modern activity and critics of this approach. We have discussed how sociology may be construed as a modern activity in the context of enlightenment, in the context of a scientific approach to study society, okay, and so on. And we must bring about a critique to such view about sociology as a modern activity. Okay. Then we discussed what are the central philosophical and political foundations of this critical modernism or critical modernist paradigm in sociology. There are four central pillars of modernity, namely holism or totality, reflexivity, rationality, and social movements. Okay? And What is that holism or totality? What is that reflexivity? What is rationality? What do we mean by social movements? Holism or totality refers to the idea that society is a unit in some sense and that it can be studied as a single entity. Reflexivity refers to the idea that we cannot simply observe society from the outside because we are also involved in it. Rationality refers to the idea that we can understand society in the ways in which we can explain to other people. Social movements refer to the idea that creative human action both shapes the social whole and in turn is shaped by it. We have discussed these things and we are going to discuss it in today's lecture. When we discuss nature of sociological theory and so on, and in the lectures to follow we are going to discuss the nitty-gritty of these 4 central pillars of modernity. We are going to discuss all the contributions towards modernity, many contributors to modernity through the lenses of holism or totality, reflexivity, rationality and social movements. Okay? And the method that we are going to adapt, okay, in this course sociological perspectives on modernity, okay, we are going to deploy the sociological imagination by C. Wright Mills. Sociological imagination is very important to understand the larger historical scene in terms of its meaning and for the inner life and the external career of a variety of individuals. Secondly, it enables us to take into account how individuals in the welter of their daily experiences often become falsely conscious of their social positions. We have discussed this. We in the first lecture we discussed how merely earning more income doesn't alter my class situation. Okay? That is why classes are manifestations of economic differentiation. Classes are based not on the income that one earns, but classes are based on the positions that an individual occupies in the process of production. That is why I gave you this example. For example, if there are 2 blacksmiths, one an owner and the other a paid worker, okay, both belong to 2 different classes, not one. Okay. It is very important to understand these things. Okay. That is why only by raising somebody's income, okay, does not alter his or her class position. Okay. That is why sociological imagination is very important, okay, to enable us to take into account how individuals in the welter of their daily experiences often become falsely conscious of their social positions. Thirdly, within the welter of their daily experiences, the framework of modern society is sought and the psychologies of a variety of women and men are formulated. The sociological imagination also helps us grasp history and biography and the relation between the two within society. We also discussed how history is different from chronology, okay, in the first lecture. Okay. When we deal with this method of the sociological imagination, okay, we try to apply concept. What is that concept application? What prima facie, what are concepts? Concepts are shorthand descriptions of reality or a part of reality. Okay. Concepts are not static, concepts are dynamic. How do concepts change? Concepts do not change on their own. Concepts undergo transformation only when our real world phenomena undergo transformation. If our real world phenomena undergo changes, then concepts are also bound to make, we are bound to make changes in our concepts. concepts. When I say concept application, I mean it must be a good working relationship with theory. I mean, this does not mean a static possession of information about what Marx or Weber or Giddens or Habermas or Foucault or Popper or Kuhn said, or even a programmatic statement that we take their theories to be true and see their own work as applying them to the examination of specific problems. Okay. Instead, a good relationship with theory implies the ability to think about our immediate research problems in a way which generates ideas of more general relevance, which are thus in one way or another theoretical, and to examine the work of other scholars, other sociologists for such ideas which might be of use in our own practice. Okay. I mean, this suggests a number of ideas. Okay. I mean, when I say a good working relationship with theory, I mean theory about something, whether that something is as specific as the reasons for gender disparity or as general as the nature of society in the abstract. In every case, whether it is very specific, very concrete, or whether it is very general or abstract, okay, in every case it refers at a greater or lesser degree of abstraction to human experience. When I say human experience, I mean at least two experiences, that is, those are our experiences as well as other people's experiences. Our experiences are not isolated categories. Our experiences must be examined in relation to the experiences of other people. Other people's experiences similarly are not isolated categories. Other people's experiences must be examined, must be evaluated, okay, in consonance with our own experiences. Okay, it is very important. Okay. Then, I mean, I tried to provide a gist of whatever we discussed in the first lecture, and in today's lecture, okay, at this point we can make some slightly more general statements about the nature of sociological theory. Explicit theorizing about the nature of the social world is the most characteristic feature of the sociological imagination. It is very important as against both everyday forms of thought and forms of research in whatever discipline which take theory for granted or abstract from the social altogether. This of course suggests that an awful lot of what passes for sociology is so only by courtesy and not on its own merits. I mean, when we discuss the nature of sociological theory, it is very important to understand what do we mean by sociological theory. Sociology, as we know, it refers to a study of society and its constituents. It is the relationship between individual and society that sociology tries to study. Sociology is all about social institutions, political institutions, economic institutions, and so on. Okay. I mean, when we discuss sociological theory consists of perspectives on the nature of the social world. When I say nature of the social world, I do not mean the nature of the social world will be subsumed under laws of society. No, they are not laws of society. When I say nature of the social world, I mean they are concepts, ideas and perspectives which are transferable from one context to another. Thus, it makes a relevant distinction between substantive concepts derived from the specific context and formal concepts which can mediate between specific and general contexts. This is very important. One must understand this. I'm looking at Glaser and Strauss, their works, where they refer to how sociological, nature of the social world, okay, it's all about concepts, ideas and perspectives which are transferable from one context to another, making a relevant distinction between substantive concepts and formal concepts. What are those substantive concepts? Substantive concepts are derived from the specific context. Okay? It must be very concrete, specific, particular contexts. Okay? And formal concepts can mediate between specific contexts as well as general context. Okay? Because what we are interested in, why we are discussing substantive concepts and formal concepts, because what we are interested in is the social, the interactive and the communicable. A few sociologists believe that individual social entities, realities can only be known in their own terms and cannot somehow be brought into relation with other social contexts. This does not, of course, mean that we are looking for one size fits all explanations. If such an explanation was possible, we would probably have noticed by now. The primary content, the primary content of sociological theory then is statements about the nature of the social world. And when I say statements about the nature of the social world, I do not mean those statements about the nature of the social world are isolated categories. They are very much embedded in our society, in our culture, in our polity, in our economy and so on. Okay. In our institutions, in our ideologies and so on. Okay. Okay. By thinking about the social world in a particular way, okay, by thinking about the nature of the social world in a specific way, okay. However, we are simultaneously making assumptions about the way we can know it. If we assume that it is constituted by language, for example, we will adopt a very different method or methodology than if we assume that it is constituted by economic exchange. It brings us to the debate on ontology. Okay? What is ontology? What are the central questions that ontology addresses? What is being? What is existing? Okay? Perhaps for this reason, ontology addresses the question of the nature, what is being, what is existing, what exists, and which leads on to methodology, the question of how we can come to know it. Okay? This is very important because we always look at what is reality, what is being, what is existing. Okay. Finally, however, sociologists do not stand outside society any more than anyone else. Okay. We thus have to eat the food that we have cooked. If we make particular assumptions about the social contexts within which other people live, especially assumptions about the kinds of knowledge and understanding that are available to them, we cannot avoid thinking about ourselves in the same way. Our own thought is just as much a social fact as anybody else's, although it may be produced in different ways, different manner. In fact, sociology's claim to have an excuse for existing largely depends on the claim that the discipline of sociology, okay, does organize the social production of knowledge in a way which differs in minor or in major ways from the ways in which knowledge is produced in other social contexts. This would at least explain why theory is an important part of sociological knowledge. What is being, what is existing, okay, leads us to leads on to methodology that we discussed. I mean it brings us to the question of Marx's or the deliberations on Marx's materialist conception of history. That Marx said it is not the consciousness of men that determines their being, but on the contrary, their being that determines their consciousness. It's very important. Okay, Marx said it wrote it in a preface to a contribution to a critique of political economy in 1847, when he was barely 28, 29 years old. Okay, I mean he started like this. You can it is the material realities, it is the material condition which determines our consciousness. Okay, earlier notion was that no, ideas are prior to the formation of matter, but Marx made it possible that he analyzed it in a historical sense. No, matter is prior to the formation of ideas. Okay, we'll discuss these things when we discuss Marx's views on or Marx's how Marx's works have contributed to the debates on modernity. Okay, staying on with ontological questions. Then we can discuss. We will discuss sociology and everyday thinking. Metaphoric blood has been split in the past, okay, over the extent to which sociological thinking is different from everyday thinking. One position which, rather like patriarchal ideology in society more generally, is in threat as a matter of explicit theory but remains operative in much sociological practice, is the assumption that a scientific methodology can take care of the problem, so that we can see our own research as purified from the unscientific nature of everyday thinking. Okay. A mirror image of this is the argument that sociological thought is no different from any other thought. This argument also mirrors the other one in that it appears only at the level of high theory and virtually never at the level of everyday practice, except as pure cynicism. Okay. More common is the assumption that sociological thinking is under heavy pressure from many sources, but that at least in principle some statements about the social world can be made which are in whatever respect better than others. Now, I want to offer you one possible answer, which is this. Okay. Precisely because thought always takes place within a human and social context, thinking. Okay. Thinking always happens in a specific social and historical context, human context. Okay. The question of whether it is true in the abstract is one which is effectively meaningless. We cannot know truth in the abstract because we do not live in the abstract. Thought or thinking, okay, even the most vague and grand theory is an attempt to come to grips with something concrete. As we move up in the scale of abstractions, of course, the extent to which it is a coming to grips with ideas and ideas about ideas, ideas about ideas, okay, increases. But thought or thinking without an object would be void. In other words, it is the object of our research and our relation to it, which gives sociological thinking and by extension theory whatever validity it has. It implies at least a couple of things, at least two things. Okay. It is very important. Firstly, we as sociologists, as students of sociology, okay, deliberately set out to try to understand social situations, okay, which are not our immediate circumstance. Research is always at least partly a searching out of social contexts that we might otherwise have missed, and an attempt to make sense of elements of them that we might otherwise have taken for granted. This is true to an incomparably greater extent which we practice, I mean ethnographic research in contexts that we are not previously familiar with, and it becomes even more complex when we attempt to understand society, whatever we mean by that as a whole. I mean, what is that ethnographic research? I mean, it is a qualitative research method. I mean, it involves field study, participant observation and so on. Okay. If a question comes up, then we will address this. Okay. But this is not about research methods in sociology. That is why I am not going to I am not trying to go deep into ethnographic research. Okay. I mean, in other words, it is our grappling with the unfamiliar or with the familiar in unfamiliar aspects, thinking about society, for example. I mean, that makes the difference between everyday thinking, everyday thought and sociological imagination. Okay. It refers to, of course, that there are a lot of amateur sociologists out there. I mean, in this respect, the greatest contribution of methodology is not to guarantee the truth, but to push us into taking systematic account of phenomena which would generally neglect or treat anecdotally in everyday life. Okay? That is the first. Secondly, though this attempt to make sense of the social world is not something which we can expect to have an end except provisionally. I mean, why provisionally? I mean, why I am making this statement provisionally? Provisionally, we make theoretical assumptions at the start of our research. Hopefully, we have modified them by the end. But if my previous claim is right, we need to continue researching new contexts in order to maintain the unfamiliarity which is at the root of the sociological imagination. And more generally, if theory is an active relationship of investigation and understanding by producing knowledge, okay, it is likely to continue developing at least until the social conditions of all thinking or all thought, okay, are such that the barriers we have previously identified to knowledge in everyday life no longer hold. At this point, however, everyday at this point at least, everyone would be a sociologist, and theory as a specialized professional activity would have lost its justification. The complete theory, I mean, whether it is possible or not, whether a theory is complete or not, if such a thing is possible at all, okay, that also requires critical interrogation. Okay. The complete theory would thus coincide with the merging of sociological practice into a society from which it no longer differentiated itself. And such is the paradigm, okay, such is the paradigm that we must try to unfurl. We must try to unfurl the debates about such paradigms or models. At this point, I can start to tell you what this course is actually about. I have already said that this course is about the critical modernist paradigm in sociology, and I have defined some major elements of that paradigm or that model. Okay? Okay? But that does not tell us what it is, what it counts as. One definition of paradigm is the consensus across the relevant scientific community about the theoretical and methodological rules to be followed, the instruments to be used, the problems to be investigated, and the standards by which research is judged. Okay. I am taking it from Gordon Marshall, but actually I mean I borrow this idea about a paradigm from Thomas Kuhn. Thomas Kuhn wrote The Structure of Scientific Revolutions in 1962. Okay. By now, I mean then what is that paradigm? I mean it is a consensus across the relevant scientific community about the theoretical and methodological rules to be followed, the instruments to be used, the problems to be investigated, and the standards by which research is judged, evaluated, examined. Okay. By now, it should not have escaped your attention that there are more than one of these in sociology. I mean more than one paradigm. We do not follow a single paradigm in sociology. Even in sciences, people do not follow a single paradigm. I mean this is not. I offered a course on science, technology, and society in the last semester under this massive open online courses initiated by MHRD of the Government of India. I mentioned how there cannot be even a single paradigm in sciences or engineering. Okay. But in this course, okay, please try to understand that there cannot be a single paradigm or model even in sciences. Social sciences, of course, there are multiple paradigms, but a few practitioners of science they claim that there may be a single paradigm, but that is not sustainable. You cannot sustain this argument. Okay. Had there been a single paradigm, okay, then we would not have encountered multiple paradigms in astronomy, in physics, in biology, and so on. Okay. The modernist paradigm then in sociology, the modernist paradigm then is that approach to sociology which treats modernity as a central, if not the central, it treats modernity as one of the central issues in sociology. Okay. But as I have already said, ontology leads on to methodology. In other words, if we assume that the contemporary social world is so constituted that modernity can be a central defining feature, we are saying something not just about the object of knowledge, but we are also by extension making a statement about the way in which it can be known. Lastly, methodology involves thinking about the relationship between the knower and the known, between the researcher and the researched. Okay? Since knowing is itself a social activity, okay, it involves power just as much as any other social activity, good or bad, and is thus in one sense political. When I say this methodology involves thinking about the relationship between the knower and the known, between the researcher and the researched, okay, and since knowing is a social activity, okay, it involves power and authority just as much as any other social activity. It may be good, it may be bad, I am not going to evaluate that right now. And if power is very much embedded in the process of knowing as a social activity, it is also a political activity. If it is a political activity, I mean in much the same way knowledge can be described as an economic activity because of its relation to value, okay, value in exchange, or a cultural one because of its relation to meaning. And we should not take a very naive self-assessments as political or not political at face value. I mean, all intellectual activity is political in the sense that we have described, we have discussed till now. Okay. Sociology is also political in another sense, in that its object of study can be thought of as constituted partially or wholly by relations of power. However, relatively little sociology is political in the sense of being connected to action which alters the relations of power in the internal ideological battles of the local intelligentsia and as a means of career advancement. This is of course a kind of politics which tends to maintain the existing relations of power, and this may be true irrespective of whether the contents of the theory are conservative or radical. Okay. That is why it is very important to know that since knowing itself, the process of knowing itself is a social activity. It involves power just as much as any other social activity, whether good social activity or bad social activity, and is thus in one sense political. Okay. In so far as it represents a consensus, I mean in paradigm I mean what Kuhn suggested, that the scientific community, I mean whether to check the validity and reliability of any scientific investigation. Okay. What does scientific community do? The scientific community tries to build consensus, okay, even in the process of knowing, because it involves power. Okay. In so far as it represents a consensus, then the modernist paradigm represents an agreement about the key issues in terms of the proper object of theory, the nature of methodology, and the formulation of the political relationships involved. It does not represent a consensus about the resolution of those issues. Okay. It is very important. How these issues are resolved, there may not be any consensus, but it is very important to understand that the modernist paradigm represents an agreement. That agreement may be a manipulated one, that agreement may be a manufactured one, okay. But the modernist paradigm represents an agreement about the key issues in terms of the proper object of theory, the nature of methodology, and the formulation of the political relationships involved. Okay. Then if this is so, then what does it truly represent? What do they indicate? I mean this modernist paradigm in sociology or critical modernism, or critical, what are the critical themes or a set of ideas that we tend to see. Okay. Before getting into before starting the discussion on those four pillars of modernity: holism or totality, reflexivity, rationality, and social movements. Okay. Let us first see what I mean we know critical modernism, and what are the other schools of thought. Okay. Let us see. Within the overall modernist approach, we will be focusing on the critical modernist paradigm and its opponents and the contradictory views that we tend to get. The critical paradigm is in a very broad sense the approach to sociology which derives from Marx and Weber, Karl Marx and Max Weber. We will be looking at how this approach developed through structuralism and Western Marxism. At the critics of this paradigm from feminist, postmodernist, post-colonial and other perspectives, I mean cultural studies also is very important, and at contemporary attempts at rethinking these paradigms, these different schools of thought, different models of modernity. The other major approach within the modernist paradigm, the functionalist and positivist tradition deriving from Emil Durkheim and Talcott Parsons, is no longer a major contender in terms of explicit social theory in the English speaking world. I mean, India is also no exception to this, although its assumptions permeate most academic research and virtually all non-academic research. This apparent paradox that most contemporary sociological theorists reject a school whose ideas are dominant in most empirical research has to do with the close relationship between this school and common sense in the sense of the dominant modes of thought within a given society. On the one hand, this school reproduces many elements of the ideology of common sense. For example, the assumption that there are straightforward facts out there about which we can know the truth, or the assumption that our own thinking is not distorted and determined by anything other than foreseeable ignorance or occasional emotion. Its approach to the problem of reflexivity and the question of the relationship between the knower and the known, between the researcher and the researched, tends to involve methodologies which claim to render the issue non-problematic and thus irrelevant. What is aimed at is a position from which society can be treated as an external given. In other words, positivism's bracketing of the issues related to reflexivity makes its approach to modernism appear as simply an unhelpful reduction of the complexities of critical modernism. What is positivism? I mean, positivism in the 19th century and early part of the 20th century, late 19th century and early part of the 20th century, is a school of thought which held the supremacy of sciences over non-sciences. There are different tenets of positivism. There are central tenets, different central tenets of positivism. Okay, I mean, I can go on and on. I mean, in positivism, but this is not the way. This is not the part of this course. I mean, to give a glimpse of the idea that how positivism emerged. Positivism is a stage of society which could interrogate the dominance of religion, the dominance of church, I mean all religious institutions. It tried to hold aloft the banner of science. It also surpassed it also rejected the views of theology as well as metaphysics and so on. Okay. But the way that positivism tried to make a demarcation between science and non-science must be interrogated. Okay. That is very important. Okay. When I say non-sciences, I do not refer to superstitions or religion or gods and goddesses and so on. But non-sciences, I mean culture, art, literature, music. Okay. I think the scope of positivism in the 19th century, or late 19th century and early 20th century was limited. That's why I said positivism's bracketing of the issues related to reflexivity, okay, makes its approach to modernism appear as simply as an unhelpful reduction of the complexities of critical modernism. This is important, we must understand this. Okay? That what positivism said, that science is distinct from all areas of human activity or creativity because it possesses a method unique to it, that is methodological. That there is only one method common to all sciences irrespective of their subject matter, that is methodological monism. That the method of science is the method of induction, that is inductivism, that from particular instances we tend to arrive at a concrete generalization. Okay. That the hallmark of science lies in the fact that all scientific statements must be systematically verifiable, systematic verifiability. That there must be a dichotomy between fact and value. Okay. Suppose this is a table, this is a laptop, these are facts, but if I say this laptop looks beautiful or ugly, then I add value to it. Okay. That there must be a dichotomy between fact and value. See, positivism's contributions must be understood in the context of enlightenment, in the context of interrogating theology as well as metaphysics. It is very important. But in the modernist construal of against the backdrop of modernist construal in 2017-18, okay, in the 21st century, positivism's bracketing of these issues, bracketing of the way it dealt with, it propagated the idea of demarcation between science and non-science, the way it dealt with or it propagated the idea of autonomy of sciences, not relative autonomy, but absolute autonomy of sciences and cognitive authority of sciences. Okay. This kind of bracketing of the issues related to reflexivity, okay, makes its approach to modernism appear as simply an unhelpful reduction of the complexities of critical modernist paradigm in sociology. Okay. On the other hand, the functionalist and positivist schools have decisively contributed to restructuring common sense via its appearance in applied social science. The terms and categories of state and corporation activity are heavily influenced by this approach to social reality. Modernization theory, the best known functionalist contribution to sociological modernism, is a classic example of this issue of sociological theory as governing ideology. The process of development is treated as a mechanical sequence of events, which is simply an instrumental means to reach economic prosperity and enter full modernity. The crude ideological use of this argument is simply that political choices and the furthering of economic interests can be presented as technical necessities. You may look at the imposition of the Bretton Woods twins, the International Monetary Fund and the International Bank for Reconstruction and Development, popularly known as the World Bank, and all IMF, World Bank aid packages, for example, the imposition of these packages, in fact, okay, they can be presented to us as technical necessities. People have made sacrifices now for the sake of a better future. What is in practice happening, of course, is that the present sacrifices of one group of people are benefiting another group of people in here and now, and that the better future shows no signs of arriving. The crude effect of bracketing reflexivity, in other words, is to deny that theoretical arguments can be designed to serve or can be used to serve political interests. Theorizing is treated as being about society, but not as happening within social contexts. A more complex effect of avoiding reflexivity or a more complex reason for doing so, okay, is that by denying that knowing as a social activity is a social relationship between the knower and the known, between the researcher and the researched, and it becomes easier to develop theories which treat other people simply as the passive objects, both of the theorists' description of them and of their practical treatment by managers, marketing executives, civil servants and politicians. Okay? This is very important. So when we discuss critical modernist paradigm in sociology, appears to us as more interesting, the more complex and the more theoretically credible version of sociological modernity, and the course will mainly focus on it. This is the present course, sociological perspectives on modernity, will of course run into functionalist and positivist approaches at various points during the course, because theorizing starts from everyday thinking, everyday thought, okay, ways of thinking which are as close to common sense ideology as positivism, have a habit of reproducing themselves and reappearing in the form of new theories. We will also be looking at arguments that critical modernism's adherence to rationality makes it unable to be genuinely reflexive. Okay? That in effect, it is just as much an ideology of power as affirmative modernism. This is interesting. The last thing that I want to say about what a modernist paradigm in sociology is, it is that I will be using a substantive definition of sociology rather than a disciplinary one. I suggested earlier that the sociological imagination by C. Wright Mills is characterized by explicit theorizing about the nature of the social world, and this is of course, this is indeed something which does not just happen in sociology departments around the corner. If you look at around the corner, in departments of history, anthropology, philosophy, women's studies, cultural studies and so on, geography, human ecology, even in sciences, okay, and so on, we run into people looking at the same issues. They are really sociologists, but they do not know it. At the same time, of course, many people in sociology departments do their level best to avoid making any of their theoretical assumptions explicit. Lastly, though, the sociological imagination is not confined to the universities or research institutes. One of the most creative sources for social theory are social movements. You look at Industrial Revolution, French Revolution, October Revolution, Chinese Revolution, Cultural Revolution and so on. Radical democratic movement, even India's fight against colonialism. Okay, all radical democratic movements, the workers' movements, the women's movements, the environmental movements and so on. The everyday experience embodied in and transformed in these movements continues to nourish new forms of critical theorizing just as much as the common sense of domination and exploitation nourishes affirmative theory, and we will look at some major social theories related to these movements. I said I said it I said at the start of this course at the start of this course that this course does not require you to learn vast amounts of information about individual thinkers. It does not require. What it does require you to do is to think clearly about the issues involved. There is no one right way to do this. The course and the reading lists are designed so that you can think about the things that interest you and read in whatever way you find most helpful. I will be saying more about this in the lectures to follow, but these lectures are basically there to help you find a way into the ideas and the language. Theory often seems more terrifying than it actually is. Because one of the basic strategies of any aspiring science or profession is to develop jargon and specialized references. Medieval clerics spoke Latin and discussed the idea of theologians, and sociologists use their term, use their own language in a particular way and discuss each other's ideas. All of this is something that can be learned in the same way that people interested in films come to learn the names and techniques of particular directors, or people who pick up a new sport learn the rules and the jargon that goes with it. That might be enough analogy. There are infinite number of possible ways into this field of thought, and they are all interrelated. You may read one author and you will learn a lot about another one and pick up ideas and phrases that will help you make more sense of the whole field, and that is why there are no set texts and no hierarchy of readings. The central thing is the central thing which remains is the ideas. They are the ideas themselves, and your thinking in and through those ideas. Okay. Then what are these ideas? What are these critical themes? Okay. In the next lecture, okay, we are going to discuss the modernist paradigm in sociology, and what are the critical themes, or what are the critical set of ideas which are very much involved in, which are very much embedded in the construal of the modernist paradigm in sociology. Thank you.